Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Global Policy Director and General Counsel, Chamber of Digital Commerce, Amy Kim.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be able to introduce our next segment discussing cybersecurity with respect to blockchain applications. Leading this discussion is Aaron Kleiner, Director of Industry Assurance and Policy Advocacy from Microsoft's Digital Trust Group. In this role, he leads a team responsible for enabling the use of cloud computing by regulated industries and shaping cybersecurity policies for emerging technologies. Before I invite Aaron to take the stage, a bit of background on how we got here. Aaron and his colleague Aaron English and others, thank you, at Microsoft have overseen a project in partnership with the Chamber to discuss cybersecurity considerations involving blockchain technology. We at the Chamber were very excited to partner with Microsoft on this project, as cybersecurity is a critical issue for any developing technology in an online world, and more so during a time when hacks of all kinds of business have become an almost daily occurrence. As part of our daily work, educating and advocating with policymakers regarding the benefits of blockchain, cybersecurity is always one of those benefits. So we saw this as a real opportunity to highlight this in more detail and really focus on what that means, and at the same time providing a resource for the policy and industry community. The result of our work appears in a new paper called Advancing Blockchain Cybersecurity: Technical and Policy Considerations for the Financial Services Industry. This paper shines a spotlight on the inherent architecture of blockchain technology and recognizes that both public and private blockchains carry inherent cybersecurity benefits inherent within its architecture. We also explore some of the cybersecurity risks posed to blockchain-based platforms and make some recommendations there. As it turns out, many of those risks are applied broadly to all e-commerce technologies. Finally, this paper highlights platforms in the financial services industry. So we use permissioned platforms as a type of case study to describe those benefits and risks inherent within permission-based systems, which is what we're seeing most often used today in the financial services industry. We hope that this paper will highlight the inherent benefits within blockchain technology for the industry and for policymakers, and hope that this is the beginning of a much broader discussion and conversation of how it can be utilized and strengthened for financial services and elsewhere. So with that, a special thanks to Aaron and his team for their work and thought leadership on this project. Please help me welcome to the stage Aaron Kleiner.
Thank Amy for her kind introduction, and also for the Chamber and all of you for having us today. Microsoft is proud to be an executive committee member at the Chamber and also a sponsor of today's event. As Amy mentioned, we are releasing a white paper today called Advancing Blockchain Cybersecurity: Technical and Policy Considerations for the Financial Services Industry. And you'll be able to pick up a hard copy of the paper outside on the Chamber's table immediately after this session. And while you're sitting here listening to me, you can download it from Microsoft on the Issues, which is our public policy blog. It's available now. Amy mentioned our collaboration on the paper, and I'd also like to go a bit deeper on that. Some of the fundamental considerations that drove us to draft this paper was really two things. Number one, improving the state of cybersecurity globally, and number two, enabling blockchain usage, both of which are concerns facing governments and enterprises around the world. Now, we believe that both of these concerns can be addressed together, and in fact, they can be mutually reinforcing. We believe that there are elements of blockchain that can really improve the state of cybersecurity. However, we do need to think on a global basis, and we do need to think about how these policies and such will be implemented by governments around the world. We call this a blockchain world. Cybersecurity policy for a blockchain world. The question is, what does a blockchain world really look like? It sounds like a concept, In fact, we've been on a journey to get there for some years now. This is a map of global internet users in the year 2005. Each country is represented by a square on the map. It's identified by its top-level domain, or TLD. The squares are sized relative to their total internet user population, and the color of the square indicates the depth of internet penetration in the society. So the darker the square, the deeper the internet penetration. Now, in the year 2005, global internet users were a fairly lonely community in some ways. The US had only 200 million internet users, which oddly enough was twice the number of Chinese internet users. And obviously the tables have turned since that time. You look at the centers of gravity, the United States, Germany, Japan, the UK, etc. These are countries where internet users were already 80% of the national population, and this is more than 10 years ago. This tells you something about the world that was going to come over the next decade or so. But what's interesting about this map is you can't really see the technology behind it. You can't see exactly what's going on online from the demographics alone. But let me remind you, at this point, Facebook was 1 year old. The first video was uploaded to YouTube in 2005. And the leading use case for blockchain, or distributed ledgers, was BitGold, which some of you may have read about in the history books. Fast forward 10 years, the world's changed quite a bit. China now has more internet users than the United States and India and Brazil combined. You can already begin to see the depth of penetration creeping in countries like China and India. And in fact, even countries like Nigeria and Indonesia start to pop on the map in new and interesting ways. In fact, you'll see that Nigeria has nearly as many internet users as Mexico or Germany. This portends a growth in digital transformation that we're only beginning to see today in the year 2018, and we'll see more of in the coming few years. What I find particularly interesting about this map is how the developing world of the global south is starting to come online in new and interesting ways. In fact, companies in this era, companies like Flipkart, companies like Didi that were mentioned earlier, these services are really beginning to take off in markets outside of the United States. But fast forward just a few more years, the world we're sort of barreling into today. 2025. This is what the map of internet users will look like just some years ahead. China, Russia, etc., are all reaching 80% plus internet use within their national populations. These countries are becoming at least as connected as the United States and other Western countries, if not more. This tells you something about the technologies that we're discussing today and the opportunities that all of us will have in shaping how the world uses them. Because all of these countries, all of these societies will be dependent on digital ledgers. I'd like to posit that every internet user is a potential blockchain user. You've heard a lot about use cases today in financial services, retail and manufacturing, healthcare, the public sector. Everything noted on this slide was covered already today. So in some ways, there's not more for me to say about these examples, although I was particularly impressed with the blockchain for champagne case study. But I think what's telling about my having identified these use cases in preparing these slides and today's conference already addressing many of these use cases is that the people in this room and the people online already have identified the promise of this technology and are working to make it a reality. But the reason why I say that every internet user is a potential blockchain user is that the potential depends in part not only on the technology environment, but also on the policy environment. And that's why we're having this event here in DC and not somewhere else. if we don't get the policy environment right, the technology itself is not enough. That's true generally, and it's true in particular when it comes to cybersecurity. Let's talk about aligning the technology and policy ecosystems. In looking at regulated sectors where blockchain is likely to be particularly useful, regardless of whether we're talking about financial services, healthcare, and others, what you'll see is that regulators tend to have 5 core concerns, I would say, when it comes to technology usage. Number 1, systemic risk and resilience. Can technology help to mitigate the risk and impact of catastrophic failure? Number 2, identity. They used to say, no one knows you're a dog on the internet, until, of course, dogs were connected online. But the idea that technology should enable more authentic and verifiable interactions online, clearly a concern for many governments today. Data protection. We're told that organizations should assume breach in their operations. Well, if that's true, then how can technology help mitigate the risk and impact of data breaches? Controllability, ensuring that administrators and end users have some controllability in their technology ecosystem and experience, that it's not just the service provider that's pulling the strings, essentially. And then finally, transparency, improving trust through user and regulator visibility into how the technology operates. These concerns are universal. They're not limited to the United States, Western Europe, or any particular region. Everywhere that we go and do cybersecurity policy work, we find that these concerns pop up. So then the question is, what's blockchain's role in addressing them? And what's been interesting in our analysis is when we look across that list, blockchain offers at least part of the solution to every one of these challenges. Systemic risk and resilience. Blockchain is a distributed architecture with no single point of failure. Identity. Blockchain offers unique models for user verification and, in fact, in some instances, integration with online identity suites that are offered to leading enterprises through cloud services. Data protection. Blockchain's consensus mechanism is built on encryption protocols. Controllability. Today, Microsoft is one of the providers of cloud services that are optimized for blockchain management. And finally, transparency, and this is really where blockchain leads the way. Participants have visibility across the chain. That's a really unique feature of blockchain. So as you work through these regulatory concerns, it's quite interesting to sort of disaggregate the many benefits of blockchain and line them up against these categories of concerns that regulators tend to raise. But the thing is, it's really not enough to connect the dots on stage, particularly in this room. What's important is to take these messages and transfer and translate them outside of this room and outside of this context. And so in our paper, what we do is walk through 4 categories, if you will, of policy recommendations to enable blockchain usage and to improve security. The first is to identify industry's role in addressing cybersecurity risk. We often say at Microsoft that cybersecurity is a team sport. It's not just a matter of IT doing the right thing or the board or engineering. It's really about everybody playing their part. And so, particularly in the context, as Amy mentioned, of permissioned blockchains, what we recommend is that participants should use a tailored version of the NIST cybersecurity framework, leveraging those controls within the framework that are focused on the network. When we have participants in a permission system that are leveraging the framework, we're a lot more likely to have a secure ecosystem around that particular network or deployment. Dialogue between industry and regulators. That's part of what we're doing here in this room, but it's also important to do it beyond the room. Regulatory sandboxes are obviously a growing trend globally. We've seen them in use around the world, whether in Europe or in Asia Pacific. But what we find, though, is that they're a tool for both technical and non-technical engagement. It's not only a matter of discussing the technology, it's also about discussing why. What's the use case? What's the problem we're trying to solve? And then helping regulators think through other use cases or other problems that blockchain can be used to solve. Improving the regulatory recognition of blockchain security. This we envision as sort of an outcome of the sandbox activity, but also an outcome of industry reaching out in a proactive manner to regulators to articulate how blockchain works and how we see the benefits of blockchain. Ultimately, industries are going to look to their regulators and other agencies for cues as to whether blockchain is appropriate, whether blockchain is acceptable, and we're here to encourage policymakers and others to begin to endorse those benefits as well. And then finally, harmonizing international standards and regulatory requirements. Now, what we mean here is that often we see blockchain deployed on top of existing IT systems. Specifically, at least in the case of Microsoft, it would be Microsoft Cloud Services. Now, there's a growing body of guidance concerning cloud and cloud security, especially in the financial services sector. And that body of guidance is quickly being supplemented by guidance pertaining to blockchain, DLT, et cetera. What we'd like to see is that blockchain-specific guidance is harmonized with cloud and other IT guidance. So you don't have inconsistency. In fact, rather you have consistency between that broader IT guidance and guidance that's more specific to blockchain or DLT applications. That harmonization is really key in reducing regulatory friction and enabling innovation within blockchain-dependent enterprises. With that, I'd like to invite you to take a look at our paper and to engage with us. I'm going to explain the various URLs and so forth there for just a moment. At the top, you'll see the URL for our Microsoft on the Issues blog. The paper is available there. I understand it'll be available soon on the Chamber's website. You can also take a look at Azure. That's our Microsoft service through which we offer certain blockchain services. If you'd like to engage with our engineering team, it's berlineng@service.microsoft.com. My colleague Aaron English and I are both here today. You can reach Aaron, the other Aaron that is, at ERIE at Microsoft.com, and I'm Aaron.Kleiner at Microsoft.com. Really happy to be here, look forward to further engagement with you, and appreciate the opportunity to share these thoughts. Thank you.